and 5, 6, 7, 8, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, 7, 8, and again. Hello, my name is Sandy Maya. I'm a dance teacher, and this podcast is for me to share my after-class thoughts with you. Enjoy! Hello everyone, this is my very first podcast that I am creating. My name is Sandy, and I am a dance teacher. And I mostly teach belly dance, but I recently also started to teach show dance. Now I call it show dance because I am not really limiting myself to one style. There are aspects of jazz in there, and contemporary, and modern, and ballet, and belly as well. And I simply think about what I think would be entertaining on stage, pick some music that kind of resonates with most people, because we like to perform in community settings, so where the community comes together like a family event, and it's important to cater to everyone really, or at least try to. You can't please everyone, of course, but yeah, so that's really the idea of it. But I'd like to talk today about belly dance. And I don't know about other teachers, if you're a teacher or a student, but every time I teach, I learn myself. And I learn by watching students, I learn by how they react to my instructions, I learn by figuring out whether they get what I say, whether I need to explain it in different ways. And it also gives me a chance to check myself. If I teach them to do something, then you kind of also need to adhere to the same rules. I know it's easy to say, do as I say, not as I do. And surely that's the case every now and then, especially as a choreographer. I find it very hard to stick to one version when I teach my class. As the choreo develops, as they learn it, and the more I see them do it and the more I listen to the music, I already have different ideas of what I would love to do. Obviously I can't do that to my students, and I wouldn't, otherwise you would never be done with it. But it is one of those things that if they ask you to dance it with you, that chances are that I make mistakes. Simply because I already have loads of different versions in my head that pop up where I go, oh, that would be great, or there's something that could be adjusted. And so that sometimes is not very helpful for the students. The other thing that I find is when I teach, I mirror, which means that I'm using my left when I want my students to use the right. However, when I dance with them, I need to do the same side as they do. So there's a lot going on in my head, which is good because, you know, I think it's a great exercise, and I love doing it. It's challenging, and I like to think that it keeps me young, mentally anyway. And so the other thing is, when I watch my students, I obviously watch them as they perform for me. And so I see everything the other way around. And so if they do ask me after 10 lessons, could you just dance it with us? Chances are that I actually mix it up and I go left when it should be right, simply because I may have created the choreography, I may have taught them bit by bit and showed them the different stages and how to connect things. But then I put my trust into the troupe to deliver the dance. Just because I'm teaching it does not necessarily mean that I can deliver it. I strongly believe that if you want to perform something, you need to practice. You can know a dance, that's fine. You can learn the choreography, the routine in by heart, that's fine. But there's another element that goes with it, and that is knowing the choreography really well and doing it over and over. If I create a piece, that does not mean I'm ready to perform it. I create a piece and it's raw. And even though I know what the moves are that should be going, if I don't repeat it myself like 100 times, I don't want to put myself on stage and perform it because it isn't ready. And so when I teach, I could, of course, I could be one of those teachers, and I'm not putting anyone down who does it, but the way that I teach is I teach sections, and I keep watching my students. So once I showed them what they need to do, and I do it a few times with them, and then I leave them to be by themselves. I could just, of course, dance with them all the time, but there are downsides to it, in my opinion. One thing is that I can't really check on them and see if they're doing it right. Of course, if you have mirrors, you get a little bit of an idea. But when you turn, there are all these little things that you do not see. You can also not, you can also miss if somebody is not in sync with somebody else if you're dancing with them. The other downside with that is, and I've seen that with students, and that's one of the reasons why I learned very early not to dance with my students, and that is that they rely on you being there. So while they're learning the dance and they're doing it with you perfectly, the minute you leave them by themselves and you tell them, okay, you can just perform it wherever you like, they panic, they freeze, and they have no idea what they should be doing. They know the dance inside out because when I'm dancing with them, they follow the whole thing along, no problem. But there's something missing. Actively, they're not taking in what moves are coming next. And that is why I decided, and this is my way of teaching, that's what I choose, simply to empower my students to be able to perform without needing to rely on somebody else. It is much better if you can teach yourself to remember what is coming next rather than following along to someone who's dancing with you. The other thing is as well, when it comes to performances, you're never guaranteed that everyone is there, which is really tricky when it comes to formations. I love formations, I love playing around with them, but the thing is that it can go horribly wrong if you have a piece where you need every single dancer and you don't have them there all the time. Like when you're teaching a piece, not only that you as a teacher need to know where the people who are not there at the time should be, but it makes it incredibly difficult for the students to get a feel, to know where everyone is. And then obviously the biggest downside of it is that when you're performing a piece with formations and one person or two are missing, the whole thing kind of falls apart. It just doesn't look the same. For an outsider who didn't put it together, for somebody who's not really aware, they may not pick up on it, but they may probably have this feeling, there's something not quite right, it's a little bit off. Whereas if you have everyone there, then it's a really big impact. It's really nice to see. So it is really important to have a strong group if you want to play around with choreographies. And you need to be able to rely on them. Of course, there are always emergencies that can happen on the day, and it's just something that you need to try and prepare for. And the big companies that get paid for performances, they obviously have understudies. And that's great if you have that, because then you always make it work. But I can't be the understudy for 15 students because chances are that if I need to jump in last minute, I need to know exactly what function that person had in the whole piece together, because there comes the trust in when I teach them that they know where they need to be and where they need to go. And so even if I'm the creator of the piece and even if I'm the teacher, I may actually be the one who's messing everything up if I do jump in. And I think it's really hard for people to grasp, to understand. They think, well, if you created it, if you put it together, you should remember it. And it doesn't really quite work like this, because a creation is really quickly put together for those who have a feel for it. But then putting it into action and making it work with everyone is a different thing altogether. There was this one incident where I created a piece for a fellow dancer, because she's not a choreographer, and so she really wanted to do a solo, and I created one for her. Now, I created it for her, which means that the stylization changed. It is not something that I would have performed, because it is not my style, but because I knew her quite well, I knew what style she liked. I did ask her which moves she would like to have in that choreography. And so we put it together and I worked with her on it. But because I'm teaching different groups, anything that I don't need to know, need to keep in my head, it's going out of my head. So I put the piece together, I taught her, and then that does not mean that I can perform it, because I have not practiced it myself at all. So we had this one performance opportunity, and she was scheduled to dance, but then something happened and I wasn't sure whether she could make it on time. And so I took a whole day practicing my own dance that I created for her, just so that I could cover her on the day and dance it. Now, with one day practicing it, I would not have done a great job. I really would not have done. But because the setup, the whole set could not have changed, because everything was already ready, the playlist, the venue. It's not something that you can necessarily change last minute. So she did turn up in the end, which was great, and she did it really well. But yes, just because I'm a choreographer and I create something does not mean that I can dance it unless I practice it myself. And the same goes with any of the choreographies that I put together in the past. The minute we performed it a few times, or my students performed it, it goes out of my head. That's it. I'm done with it. And unless I'm bringing it back up at a later point, like a few years later, which I sometimes do with choreographies if I really like them, then I bring them back out. But that means I need to teach myself again. And very often, because I grow as well, with every class I teach, with every choreography I make, with every performance that I dance, with anything really, I'm growing all the time. So a choreography I created 3 years ago would not be the same as a choreography I would create today. So even though I may have liked the song and the whole choreography 3 years ago, and I may keep quite a few of the essences that are in the choreography, I may keep them in there, but I would probably then make changes to reflect what I know now. And the other thing is as well, if it's a solo or a group piece, that changes everything, the whole dynamic, because the power of a whole group doing simple moves at the same time, like completely in sync, is something that can hardly be matched. If you see anything on stage that is just happening at the same time and everyone looks the same as if they are programmed, it's just one of the most incredible things, in my opinion. It's just something that is so hard. I find it a lot easier to do a solo performance, because I don't need to worry about messing it up, forgetting a step. But if you work in a group, you just really need to be spot on. You need to have the right timing. You try to avoid any blunder, because it will be seen. And so anyone who is on stage as a group and just working together as one, it's just a really talented thing, in my opinion. Okay, so this was my first podcast, sharing my thoughts with you, and I hope you liked it, and I shall be doing this more often. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in.